Hello there, and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at this N16 Almera. And what we're going to be doing on the Almera is an oil change along with the filter, the air filter, and also a coolant change. Now we're going to be starting with jacking the vehicle up, and certainly at the front the jacking point on that front cross member there is very similar to the K11 Micra. We also can suffer from the same problems that we have on the K11 Micra, which includes the heavily corroded front cross member. The sill jacking points are just being shown in the photo along with the box section there, which you can see there. And also to the rear of the car, the box section, and also the jacking point there. Overall, this particular example is from 2001. It's not in terrible condition. It just needs a little bit of work, which I'm going to be giving it. A little bit of de-rusting here and there, which I'm also going to be carrying out. And just a little bit of work, mainly just to sort of bring it up to sort of more presentable condition, certainly underneath and certainly on top. It has around 57,000 miles on the clock from new, and it has actually been in the family from about, I think it was about 2 years old when it was first bought by my wife's grandfather. The car itself is now in the ownership of my mother-in-law and has been for a number of years. Now, jacking the vehicle up is actually very similar to the K11 Micra. Using a trolley jack, you just jack it up on that particular jacking point at the front. And what I've actually done is, because I'm on the flat surface, I've actually let the handbrake off so that the car can move forward with the jack. I tried it without letting the handbrake off, and the car nearly fell off the jack, which was not the best thing. There are probably safer ways to do it, but this seemed to work for me. But obviously follow the manufacturer's recommendations, and make sure that you jack the vehicle up and apply the handbrake firmly before doing so. Another thing you can possibly do is to also sort of chock those rear wheels just to make sure that the car stays in place. On this particular occasion, because the car is wider than the Micra, I've actually supported it on the jacking points. I would recommend getting some of those spacing blocks that you can get just to sort of protect those sill flanges. Now I'm just undoing the sump bolt. From memory it is a 14mm bolt. I think that was a similar size to the Micra. The sump is very similar, in a very similar position, and the sump bolt again is in a very similar position to the K11 Micra. Literally just a case of making sure that the filler cap is removed, undoing that bolt and letting the sump drain into the pan I've put below. The oil filter is actually in pretty much an identical place to the K11 Micra on the back of the block. The oil filters look similar, but they are actually a different part number, so I don't believe the two are interchangeable. The air filter itself is a bit of a different setup, because you've actually got the airflow meter just before the air filter, and the air filter doesn't sit on top of an airflow meter and also the inlet manifold. So on this particular example the filter comes out. This one's seen better days. It's not terrible, but it is definitely needing a change. You can actually see some light still through it, so it's not terrible. I've got a replacement filter here, just a generic replacement, and just taking that out and comparing it with the existing filter. Make sure I've got the right filter. As you can see, that one's in much better shape. Just doing the compare and contrast there. And literally putting it back in is a case of dropping it in, making sure that that seal sits firmly under the cover. Now the cover took a little bit of wriggling to put it back on, probably because I was holding the camera at the time and didn't have both hands available to sort of hold down the cover. But with a little bit of wriggling you can get those 4 clips back on, and you've got yourself the filter back in there quite nicely and everything is good. So just repositioning again, doing up the rear first, followed by the front, the other rear, which is on the side, and finally the last front. Now once the oil is drained, I'm just basically retightening that sump plug. And same process that I use for every sump plug I tighten, which is just over hand tight on the ratchet. That is tight enough. So we don't need to go any tighter than that because you do risk stripping the threads, but that's absolutely tight enough for this particular purpose. I can now move on to the equally fun job of removing the filter, which is a good fun position to get to. So I managed to actually get this one off because it was on just over hand tight, so I managed to get that one off with turning it and then moving out of the way very quickly to let the filter drain into the drain tray that I've got beneath. Now on this particular car, because of the position of the exhaust, it's not like the K11 where the oil just sort of trickles down straight into the tray. It does actually hit the top of the exhaust. So as long as the exhaust is cold or cooler, you could actually put some paper towels on top of there just to protect it. But what I would do afterwards is just give the whole area a bit of a general wipe down, make sure that everything is clean. So coming back out from under the car, which is always a fun task, we can actually see, if we look at the top of the engine bay, that you can just about get the filter out from the top side. This is because there is more space between the back of the engine and also the bulkhead. And we've also got a slightly longer inlet manifold set up here than we do on the K11 Micra, which does mean that the engine is positioned further forward slightly. You can get it out. There is that wiring loom in the way and also the oil pressure sensor wiring in the way, but you can, with a little bit of wriggling, you can extract that oil filter. However, it probably is easier to go underneath and do it. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking a look at the old filter. It's been on there for a little longer than I would have liked. I'll be honest, I haven't actually changed the oil on this vehicle for a couple of years. Normally I sort of change the oil in this particular vehicle yearly and coolant every 2 years, brake fluid every 2 years. But on this particular occasion, servicing has been skimped a little bit. Total mileage in that time, I've got to say it's probably under 5,000, under 6,000 miles. But obviously make sure that you do change yearly. So we've got the two filters side by side there. This is really just to check that the filters are the same. They look identical. So obviously oiling up the O-ring and putting a tiny little bit of oil into the filter itself before reattaching. We've got a good view of the filter mounting point there. Give it a good clean over with a rag before reattaching. You can also see, I think, the low oil pressure switch as well, which is somewhere in that picture. And I think at this particular point I was just getting that filter on. So what I do with the filter here is put the filter on, and I'm doing it hand tight plus a little bit more hand tight. I'm not actually using any tools to put the filter on, so it is literally hand tight and then just over hand tight to make sure that it's firmly on there. Oil filling itself, the vehicle takes approximately 4 litres of semi-synthetic 10W40 oil. I'm not going to go into too much depth as to what type of oil I've actually used. It's just standard Halfords semi-synthetic. Other better quality oils are available, but because I change or have been changing the oil in this vehicle at least once a year or every sort of 4,000 miles or so, there isn't much need to do anything. So starting the vehicle, waiting for that oil pressure light to go out. a nice smooth idle. And just revving the vehicle gently. Get the oil circulated around the engine. So for anybody interested, this engine I think is the QG15DE. I think that's quality green 15 double overhead cam electronic fuel injection. The Micra I serviced was the CG10DE, so that was clean green 1 litre double overhead cam electronic fuel injection, going by sort of Nissan parlance. So now I came on to actually changing the coolant. So it's literally just a quick drop of the coolant. I'm not doing anything else such as back flushing or anything of that nature. It is best if possible to do this when the car is warm, and all I did was to just remove this under tray, push it to one side because it's attached to the inner arch liner, and then I can get to the bottom hose. I couldn't find any drain taps or anything like that. Certainly on the radiator, so removing the bottom hose was the best approach that I had. I believe that there are some drain points on the block if you want to go that far, but I literally just removed the bottom hose, as you can see that I'm doing here. Made sure that a tray was positioned underneath the bottom hose, pulled the bottom hose off and let the coolant drain into a vessel that I had located underneath. Antifreeze is poisonous, and I would recommend disposing of it carefully. What I'm actually doing is I've actually drained the antifreeze into that box, tray, and I'm actually decanted it into one of my oil containers. So it'll probably get mixed up with various bits of engine oil and then get taken to the dump for reprocessing. Now, what I actually did beforehand was I purchased some new replacement Jubilee clips, as the ones that were on there were looking a little bit worse for wear. So I've replaced both the top and the bottom hose clips with some new items which should hopefully be a little bit better than the ones that were previously on there, certainly less corroded. What I'll probably do at some point is to go around the rest of the system replacing those Jubilee clips so that we've got the best quality clips that we can possibly have. Now it's a 7mm bolt on the top of those, 7mm nut or socket, whatever you want to call it. And to reattach those, it's just a case of tightening up, and I went over just hand tight on the ratchet because I didn't want to go too far. I did on one of the clips that I had put on previously. I did go a little bit too far and ended up shearing the clip completely. Thankfully I had a whole load of them, so it was just 1 out of 10 or so it wasn't too bad. On this particular radiator there is some actual flanges on the pipework coming out of the radiator, so as long as you've got the clip down and it can't get beyond that flange, that should be a tight enough connection so the pipe shouldn't pop off. Now you can actually see here that the cross member does have a bit of surface rust on it, which I've done a bit at the front already, but now I've got on my jobs list to actually sort of wire brush off a load of the stuff on the underside here. Eventually this cross member will need to be replaced, but I have seen examples in the scrapyard where the cross member is literally non-existent. The cross member itself is an MOT failure. It can be replaced. The work is quite involved because you do have to remove the radiator, and I think you have to remove the air conditioning condenser as well, plus a few other bits and pieces. But that pipe there is firmly on, firmly located, and we're good to go, starting with the filling up. It is a good time actually to have a look at that cross member. You can sort of check it out, you can sort of see if it needs any sort of remedial work, and obviously sort of de-rusting it, giving it a brush down is the best thing to do. Now what I've actually done here with the coolant is I'm topping it up from the radiator itself, and I'm actually topping it up until I can see it at the top of the radiator. It's a bit of a strange one, the actual bleeding sequence on this particular car. So what I've actually done beforehand is I've made sure that I've got the heater dialed fully turned to the hot position, so that we're actually getting coolant going into the matrix. And what I'm actually doing here is I'm leaving that cap open with the engine running, squeezing the top hose to work out any air bubbles, and then just holding the engine at around 2000 RPM to get coolant circulating around the system, but also to get the car warm. And what you can see here is you do actually have some of the air bubbles which are in the system working their way out. You can also see some of the previous coolant that was in the block just mixing with the new compatible coolant that I've got in the system. So originally this car actually came with the blue 2-year coolant rather than the red long life stuff. So what I'm actually doing now is I'm putting the cap back on, so the pressure cap back on, and over on this side, ignore the bungee cord, the bolt that holds it in the bottom is actually sheared. That's another thing on the job list. I'm actually topping up the header tank, or the expansion tank, with coolant up to the maximum mark. So what I'm actually doing here is just revving the engine, and I was just seeing if any of that coolant in there was being drawn into the engine itself. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I believe that obviously if there is an excess of coolant in the system, it's going to push that into the expansion tank. If there's not enough coolant in the system, it's going to be drawing back from the expansion tank back into the cooling system itself. So I'm actually making sure that that cooling system is topped up with enough coolant. So you can see here, it's a little bit later in the video, that the engine is now warm. I've removed that pressure cap carefully, and you can see that there are no huge air bubbles bolloping around the system. You've just got the sort of agitated coolant there, which is basically the pump just agitating the coolant. A little bit of overspill there, but that was just because I held it on the revs for too long. Top pipe is hot, bottom pipe is getting warmer, and the thermostat is actually on the bottom pipe mated to the block. And it was actually at this point that the thermostat is actually open, so we've now got coolant circulating around the engine. What I also did was to just give those rear hoses at the back of the engine block that then enter the heater matrix a bit of a feel, just to check that they're hot. Obviously if they are hot, it means that we have coolant circulating around the system into the heater matrix, and we do not have any kind of air block within the matrix. So given those pipes a fill, they are both very hot, which is good. It's exactly what we want. The engine itself is not actually too bad. You can hear it's running quite nicely. It's very smooth. That ticking that you can hear is the fuel injectors. And there's no sort of horrible cam chain rattle. These engines do suffer, certainly the QG15, QG18 do suffer from stretchy cam chains. Cam chain stretching, stretchy cam chains, whatever you want to call it. The first thing you sort of tend to notice, apart from obviously a bit of increased engine noise, is you do have the engine warning light coming on. It's usually because the cam sensor can't detect the sort of camshaft rotation properly because the cam chain is knackered. So just a quick test here, feeling that the vents are pumping out hot heat, and it actually is hot enough to sort of hurt my fingers slightly. And that is pretty much it for this video. Hopefully somebody will find this useful. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. The final stage that I actually performed on this vehicle was a thorough clean-up. What we're actually going to be doing in subsequent videos is going through a few of the other jobs that we will be doing. Again, thank you all very much for watching. If you have liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and also consider subscribing for more upcoming, useful, fascinating hobbies. Thanks for watching.